I'm Glendora, documentary number 3, and how are you today? We're talking about the years 1942, 1943, 1941 even. Pearl Harbor has started. The war has started. D-Day, June 4th, June 6th. It was supposed to be on June 4th, but the weather was so bad that the Allies were tied up in the English Channel and they couldn't move. And there were 13 generals, and they kept waiting for good weather to land in France, Normandy, Omaha Beach. And finally, the weather wasn't getting any better. And Eisenhower, 13 generals, and Eisenhower cast the deciding vote. D-Day was going to be June 6th. And off they went. Well, my mother was doing okay, paying for our living with boarders. The Depression was over. There was plenty of money. There were plenty of jobs, folks, but there were not plenty of people. All of our youth, those beautiful 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, our little friends that we were in high school with, were off facing cannons and bullets and agonies. And my daddy had the cancer in the mouth and the throat, but it was being treated, and it was not spreading. And my daddy decided to go to work in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's halfway between Boston and Springfield, Massachusetts. And he decided to go to work there with his brother as a barber. And then for some reason, here's a big shock. My mother, whose daddy was Irish, Old Lithers, and whose mother was Scotch, and my daddy, who was all English all the way back to the 14th century, the Folsoms can be traced, in Norfolk, England. Whatever went through those kind of minds that they, by the way, I'm Scotch, Irish, and English, and I can't get along with myself. Whatever went through those minds of theirs, they decided to go to Springfield, Massachusetts. When they were first married, they lived in Springfield, Massachusetts. My daddy was a guard at the Springfield Armory. Terrible place, the Springfield Rifle. And all of a sudden, my mother tells me we're going to Springfield, Mass. I was at Bangor High School. It was no fun because all of the friends that I had made and were so close to in 5th Street Junior High, they had melted into this mass of unknown people. And I didn't know anybody, and nobody knew me, and nobody befriended me, and I had to take Latin, and I had to take English. And how did we go to school in those days? We walked. We walked from our homes to the school. We walked home for lunch. We walked back to school. We walked home in the afternoon. Well, it was very unpleasant. The summer I had spent in Prescott, Maine, because my sister had her first child, and she wanted me to help her. And she talked my mother into shipping me up to Prescott, 180 miles north of Bangor. There was a building next to ours 97 Ohio Street, and that building was called the King's Daughters Home. Do you know anything about that? What was the King's Daughters Home? They were young ladies. I saw 3 or 4 of them once out on the little porch of their front door. What was the King's Daughters Home? And so off my mother and I went to Springfield. You went to Boston, then you changed buses, and then you went to Springfield. How many miles was it to Boston? Well, it's 90 miles to Portland, another 90, maybe 120 miles to Boston, and 90 miles from Boston to Springfield. 15 miles from Boston to Worcester. Springfield, it wasn't like Bangor. There were all of these houses that had little cubby holes in them, and those people lived in cubby holes. We didn't have that in Bangor. You lived in a whole house. You didn't live in a thing called an apartment. What was that all about? And these people would have one door to go into, and the halls were dark. And then they'd go into these cubby holes, these apartments. And there was building after building after building and after building of these apartment houses. And it seemed so strange to me. And my mother got a job taking care of a boarding house. This was a beautiful old mansion with stained glass windows, a magnificent double stairway, mahogany, the best you could have. And it was turned into a rooming house, and it was filled with military personnel. There were the people from Grand Rapids, Michigan, very Dutch, named Peggy Van de Voort. They had the downstairs room, and they had kitchen privileges. And he was a lieutenant, and he was in the Army Corps of Engineers, and he was stationed at Westover Field in Chicopee, Massachusetts, right out of Springfield, outside of Springfield. And there was Jim and his sweet wife, one of these people that you meet every 50 people. Every 50 people you meet somebody very, very nice, altruistic, helpful. And then there was Mr. and Mrs. Walker. They had one room. And Mr. and Mrs. Wolcott, they had a room. They came from New Hampshire, from way back, way up there in the White Mountains, not the White Mountains, the Green. What mountains are in New Hampshire? And the Notch, whatever that Notch was. And then there was a room that was the library of this old house, and another room across the hall, the parlor of this old house, and different people had those rooms. And it's my job, my mother's job, to take care of the house and collect the rent. And I walked the rent down to the owner of this building on Mattoon Street and handed her that rent money. And you didn't have a car in those days. No car. You walked everywhere. You walked downtown, you walked to school, you walked to the grocery store, you walked to the public market. You walked. There weren't any cars. There was nothing but gas rationing and no cars. And my mother and dad had a friend when they had lived in Springfield previously named the Gibsons. And my mother and dad reunited with them and asked their son where Glendora should go to school. Well, Glendora was in a city that had a very advanced education system. Classical high school was strictly college prep. You went to college, classical high school, only if you were going to college. Technical high school was very much engineering and rather good academically. Commerce High School was third class. They were the people who were growing up to be secretaries. And trade school were the people who were growing up to be carpenters and masons and all the trades. And Ellsworth Gibson said, take her to classical. Unquestionably, enroll her in classical. And so my mother, we arrived there in the intercession in December, January. And so the first day of class, my mother walked me to classical high school, and we walked through the doors, and they walked us into the principal's office. And the principal was very dignified and very New England and very Massachusetts and very looked down on the state of Maine, and particularly the state of Maine education. It wasn't anything nearly as good as classicals. So he made me drop Latin because he knew that my quality of Latin could not continue at their standards. And he kept me in English. You had to have English because that said what grade you were in. 10th grade English, 11th grade English, 12th grade. He gave me let me stay in algebra. And I think history, which was called civics. And put me in an art class, and a chemistry class. He let me stay in all those. Well, here I was down from Maine, a kid out of the country, a hick, and all these new people. And I brought home pediculosis captis. You know what that is? Bugs crawling in your hair. Out of the finest school in Springfield, I would bring home pediculosis captis. Well, my mother got rid of them and made sure that nobody in the boarding house got them. I used to listen to the Reverend Fulton Sheen, who became a Monsignor and became a bishop and gave wonderful speeches on the radio. And Mrs. Flanagan lived in the apartment house 2 lots up. And one morning I came out of our house on Pearl Street, and she was coming out of hers, and we converged, and we walked to school together. She was the algebra teacher, and she didn't say much to me, but she was very nice, and I did pass algebra. I liked it. And the house was filled with military uniforms. All of these people were wearing military clothes, and I learned their signiers. What the big A was the First Army. I learned many of their emblems and what they stood for. And I took up golf because Bob Hope was a big golfer. So I took up golf, and I was terrible at it. I read some of The Robe, the story of Christ's crucifixion by Douglas. And so we got through the schooling from December to June. And then my mother and my sister went to Bangor, Maine, again, and up to Presque and helped my sister with the newborn baby, which was this summer, not the summer before. I made a mistake on the dates. The airplanes up in Presque were very prominent. The bombers, the B-17 bombers, were going overhead very often. And you know where they were going from there. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president, and everything was a war effort and machines of destruction coming out at enormous numbers, monumental numbers. And those young boys suffering, agonizing, and eventually being killed and being put in the ground in Europe. It was terrible. And that's how we went through high school in the year 1943, 44, 45. But with all that suffering going on in Europe and in the Pacific, we just went on life, laughing, playing, having a good time, all of us, the adults and the children. And the war news didn't stop us. And we had rationing. The food was ration. You had so many stamps, and you could buy so much, and you had to hand the stamps into the grocer, the Springfield Public Market. Now let's take a moment here to get these things in chronological order. I ended up in 10th grade English with Miss Anthony. Miss Anthony was a rather violent kind of person. For some reason, she took a great disliking to me. Maybe she didn't like people who came from the state of Maine. Maybe she didn't like the fact that the principal put her in her class, put Glendora in her class. But she ridiculed me very often, and she made life very difficult, and I tried to get along with her. I tried to be good and do what she wanted. And guess what? She gave me a D in English. How can you get a D in English? How can you get a D in English? Well, that's what she wanted. And in classical high school, if you got a D in English, you were made to repeat it. So that put me back a grade. Maybe that's what they wanted, was to put me back a grade. So now I'm in 10th grade again. And her teacher pal was Hazel Clark, who was music director. And Hazel Clark would take the new people who came in September and look for voices so that she could put on the Handel's oratorio at Christmas. With about 150 voices. Well, that summer, I went to work as a waitress at Newhagen Inn, Wiscasset, Maine, Booth Bay Harbor. There's no sand up at Booth Bay Harbor, it's all rock. The sandy beaches stop around Portland somewhere. And it was a very interesting summer, and many of my classmates also went as waitresses. And it was really interesting. And what year are we talking about? Oh, I think 1944 or so. And when I came back, I was in 10th grade English, and the name of the English teacher was Edwin Smith. And he was kind, and he was compassionate, and he was interested, and he was helpful. And he made me very interested in English, English grammar, English construction, English literature. And I began to be a little bit educated, just a little bit education. And I was getting B's, a lot of C's, but I was getting B's. And I had to take European history. I had to take that other year of Latin. Spanish. And when I came back to school as an 11th grader, fortunately, I was assigned to Edwin Smith again. And I became very, very interested in English. And I became very, very interested in getting good marks. And now I again was the most popular in the whole school. I knew the names of every student in that whole class, 300 people. And I would walk around the school building during the breaks, and as I would pass the other students in the corridor, I would say hello by their names, and they would say, "Hello, Glenn." And it just built up to a great joy to go to school. It was an entertainment arena. It was just beautiful. And I had Wayne, and he was a clown, and Glendora was a clown, and we were the class clowns, and we did keep people laughing. We even made the teachers laugh. And Wayne and I would do comedy shows because I had the Bob Hope bug, and I would watch Bob Hope religiously 10 p.m. Tuesday night. It began with Horace Heidt, and then it went to Burns and Allen, and then it went to Fibber McGee and Molly, and then it went to Bob Hope. And then it went to Red Skelton, and that was the Tuesday night roster. And I just watched that devotedly. And that was the start of it. That's the start of what you see today. And we even put on a show at New Haven Inn of the waitresses and the busboys and the chauffeur and all those people. And the guests donated. We took up a collection and they donated. And the guests just thought it was grand. And one night, I had to do homework after supper and the dishes were done. And I sat down at the desk. I had to write a theme. We were all told to write a theme, and this is 11th grade. So I started writing the theme, and it was all jokes. It was all comedy. It was only one page and the other side of the page. A couple of days later, Edwin Smith was passing back the papers with their grades on them, and he held back one paper. He held it in his hand while he asked students to pass out the other papers. And it was my paper, and he read it before the class, and the class laughed and laughed and laughed. And he gave me that encouragement. And henceforth, I was devoted to that man, and I would do only what that man said. And it changed everything around. Did you know that I became cum laude? We used to call it cum laude. With praise, cum laude. I was on the honor roll at Classical High School, the cream of the crop of the whole Western educational field. Public educational field. Me on the honor roll. And then Crawford Lincoln thought it would be a funny joke to put Glendora, nominate Glendora for president of the senior class the next year, the class of 46. And he did. Well, the joke backfired. Glendora won easily by a 60% plurality against two men. And this was back in the days when women were not presidents of anything. Women were not allowed to be a president of anything. And it was a landslide.
Miller? Church and Miller?
Oh, okay. In the meantime, I was going to church because Mary Frances Miller, her daddy was the pastor, the minister at Hope Congregational Church. And my mother loved his sermons and his good, friendly way and his good, honest way. And we would go out on church picnics and church hikes. And this was the Congregational Church, which, of course, dominates New England. It's the old Puritan church, the old Pilgrim church. And Wayne and I would laugh and laugh and laugh at everything. And then, what was the next thing you said?
Gym class and basketball.
Oh, one time in gym class, we had a basketball, and it was time to cut out the gym class and go down and take the showers. And somebody threw the basketball into my hands. I was standing at the center line, and I just threw that basketball toward the basket. Swish! It went through. It didn't touch the rim. And the gym teacher says, "Where have you been all my life?" Isn't that funny? And Wayne, too, also works at New Egg, and that's why we knew about it in Booth Bay Harbor. It's pretty far up. It's pretty far up. Long ways from Portland.
Cafeteria?
The cafeteria. That was something brand new to me. We didn't have that in Bangor. You brought your lunch. And there was a sign in the cafeteria at one end of the cafeteria that says, it was apples, and the sign on the tray of apples said, "Take only one. God is watching." And then as you went down the cafeteria line of food, down at the other end, there were Toll House cookies. And that sign said, "Take as many as you want. God is watching the cookies. God is watching the apples."
Atlantic House?
Yes, the Atlantic House. Let me pause and try to get that one in order for you.
Okay.
I had to take European history and American history. I had to take geometry. I tried reading the Bible. I tried to find a faith. The thing that made me the happiest was the acceptance of my contemporaries and their love and their attention and their fun and their enjoyment. And Springfield, Massachusetts was such an improvement over Bangor, Maine. The opportunities were so much greater. The sophistication was so much greater. And now we're in the summer of 1945. And Glendora's at the Atlantic House, Scarborough Beach, just southeast of Portland. Mr. and Mrs. Knight had a summer resort there, and Glendora was a waitress. And there was a man there named Dr. Doty, and he was very, very, very jolly. Very jolly. And he was a professor of history at Union College in Schenectady, New York, a man of great attainment. And he took a liking to Glendora, and she liked him. She looked up to him as a professor, and he looked down to her as a teenager. And we had a talent show. We put on a great talent show. All of the waitresses had a talent, and Glendora, of course, was telling jokes, being, a miniature Bob Hope. What else is on that list, dear?
Holyoke?
What was that?
Holyoke?
Oh, yes, a lot of kids from Holyoke, Massachusetts, and the rest of us were from Springfield, Massachusetts. And Carol Shaw was going with a fellow named Perry, and Perry was going to become a minister, and Perry was a night watchman. Anything else, dear?
Sandy Beach and
Oh, yeah.
Bomb.
At Atlanta House, this was around Portland, the beach was sandy. As I said, that was just about the end of the sandy beach. It's right above Old Orchard. There was a day when Old Orchard was very swank and had Victorian homes and had nothing but money people. but Old Orchard went honky-tonk. And then what else, honey?
Atomic bomb.
Oh, yes. August 1945. What happened? Project Manhattan, Oppenheimer, Los Alamos, the splitting of the atom, uranium. It could happen. Did the Nazis have it? Did the Japanese have it? Einstein wrote a letter to President Roosevelt asking for an audience and telling him that this was in the workings and this was possible, and the terrible destruction of it. And Truman was president. FDR died of a massive cerebral hemorrhage in April of 1945. And what I'm talking about now is August of 1945. And we are told that the Japanese were warned. We were also told that President Roosevelt had insisted that the Japanese see an example of this bomb before it was dropped on their homeland. But that didn't happen. The Japanese never saw that sample. And then it happened. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And 2 weeks later, after being asked to surrender before the atomic bomb and the Japanese Empire, the warlord said no. And then 2 weeks later, the bomb dropped. No, a few days later, the bomb dropped and the surrender came 2 weeks later. Oh, and it was in Europe. In Europe, in May, was Victory in Europe Day. The Nazis had their last hurrah with the Battle of the Bulge. And I'll have to tell you later about Franklin Buell there. It just doesn't fit in here at all. Chronologically it does, but not as far as the account goes. And we came home, and Glendora was very serious, and she was a very student. Then she became magna cum laude, all A's and B's. It wasn't all A's, but it was all A's and B's. What helped a lot was getting rid of Latin. And then she was going with a young man named Crawford Lincoln. And she had done so well. The girl who had got D in English from Anthony, she was doing so well in English that she was selected to take special English, which didn't have any grammar in it at all, which didn't have any of the hard work English in it at all. It was just reading. You read a book every week and you wrote a report on it. And Glendora and Crawford, and even Glendora and Wayne, would go up to Edwin Smith's house. He was married to Florence Quilty. Her daddy was a police chief at one time, and Florence taught at Classical High School Spanish. And we would go up to Edwin and Florence's house. And they were so cordial and so encouraging. And they would let us talk and talk and talk. They would say, "Tell us all about it." And they were so kind and so understanding and so tolerant. I think we went to visit them 5 or 6 times in their home. They happened to live on Union Street, the same street that we lived on, 316 Union Street. Any other notes, honey?
That's it.
So, Glendora as president of the class. And the great big pompous Dr. Hill, at the end of the junior year, when Glendora was elected, he met her in the hallway and he lectured her about the glory and the magnificence of Classical High School. Classical High School was so well known as a trainer of the college prep course that if you graduated from high school classical, you didn't have to take the college entrance examination. The college knew that you had the best possible education. Now, what were these colleges? The Ivy League: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Dartmouth, Cornell, and the women's colleges were Smith, Mount Holyoke, Vassar, Wellesley, Radcliffe. That's where all these students went. And let us pause now. And these people, not only did they come from prestigious classical high school, but they were all prep school people. Not all. I mean, there were so many prep school people. Wilbraham Academy, Phillips Andover, Exeter, all of these famous classical schools that went back for years and years and years, the cream, the rich people. And everybody else was applying to college, and I tried to apply to college, but it didn't make any difference. We didn't have the money, so I applied for a scholarship. That didn't make any difference either. And then I had to take the college entrance examination, and I had made a terrible mess of it. And Edwin Smith was so disappointed. He mentioned it 2 or 3 times, asking me to respond, but I couldn't respond. The reason I did so badly on the college entrance examination that I'd never taken one in my life. In Maine, we didn't have those things. But these kids around me had been taking entrance examinations and college examinations all their lives, and aptitude tests, but I didn't know anything about that. And that's why I failed so badly. So where was I going to go to college? Well, Springfield, Western New England, Western Massachusetts, opened up a junior college. That was the start of the junior colleges, the first 2 years. And that is about as low as you could get in college education. So that's where I was going to end up. What other things did you have for me to tell, honey?
Equinox House?
Oh, and so I got a job as a waitress at the Equinox House in Manchester, Vermont. You know about the Equinox House, don't you? Mount Equinox. You know that Todd Lincoln had a house up there? The son of Abraham and Mary Lincoln?
In AIC.
And that was interesting, too. And I met Bobby Clark, the Broadway comedian, and he was starring in his show, Victor Herbert, The Sweethearts, and they took a great liking to Glendora. Glendora was not a waitress, she was a relish girl. She would go around and pass out relish to the people when the dinner started, and then at the end she would pass out something else for after dinner. But anyway, Bobby and Lucette Clark. And Lucette says, when Bobby opens in Boston and Sweethearts, before it goes to Broadway, we're going to have you come down and see the show. Well, they did. They did. It happened, and I'll tell you about that later in the next year, the next chapter. Well, just before I left Manchester, Manchester, Vermont, and by the way, my show, never mind. That's another Manchester. I have 2 Manchesters to tell you about. Just before I left Manchester, Vermont, to come home back to Springfield, I received a letter from American International College saying that I had been awarded a full scholarship, $300 a year. No, $300 a semester. Somebody was behind that. Who do you think it was? Do you think it was Edwin Smith? Somebody was behind that Glendora was going to go to a real college. To be continued.